If you look at the title of the sermon, you'll see that it says Encore. Now, you know that things can be repeats or they can be encores. Well, this is an encore sermon. I preached it to you several summers ago when I had returned from the interim pastor training out at Zephyr Point at Lake Tahoe, which was almost a transcendental experience. It was so wonderful and beautiful. And I came back all excited, and I felt as though the excitement was contagious among us all. And we talked about the possibilities for our church. And I was working from this book, The Art of Possibility, which is really a wonderful, wonderful book. It really helps an individual to see how they can be more accommodating and more open and less controlling, as well as organizations like the church. And so that's the background for this sermon, and you don't have to say, I heard that before, because I know you have, okay? So anyway, here we go. I want to start off by quoting from the best Christmas pageant ever. Anybody out there read the book? The best one person, two people, three people? Oh gosh, it is a very funny little book. And it starts off this way. The herdsmen were the worst kids in the history of the world. They lied and stole and played with matches. They were so awful you could hardly believe they were real. Then one day, they showed up at Sunday school. And though nobody knows how, they took over our annual Christmas pageant, and it was quite a show. Our Christmas pageant is always the same. Kids in bathrobes and bedsheets, acting out the story of Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus being born. Everybody knows the story. Everybody but the herdsmen. The 6 herdsmen are the toughest kids in town. Yet once they experienced the Christmas story for the first time, they helped everyone else rediscover the meaning. This book is hilarious as well as very poignant and touching, because these youngsters, rough and tough around the edges, still had a degree of wisdom. And in becoming part of the Christmas production, the pageant, they added new life and new insight into how to be the church. Anyone who has ever directed a Christmas pageant can relate to this story. Anybody who has participated in a Christmas pageant will relate to this story too. The hilarity of the book is not predicated on the story of Jesus' birth, but rather on the unorthodox behavior and the insights of these youngsters as they step into the biblical story. It's very funny, and you know what? It's okay to laugh. Today, we're going to take a look at the means in which a church can lift off and lift up from a world of struggle, and we can just sail smoothly into the vast universe of possibility. You know, we all know people who want things done their way. And sometimes, you know, you can talk to them and you can convince them otherwise, and sometimes you can't shake their resolve. And if you try to, they will do everything possible to undermine and to undercut new ways of doing things, new ideas, any type of change at all. Remember several weeks ago when I talked about the coat hooks being at one level, and then the interim came in and dropped them 3 inches, redid all the coat hooks, and everybody was in an uproar because, my God, they changed the coat hooks. It's that sort of thing. You will find people who are just completely resolved to have things done the way they want them done. And if you try to disturb that, they might take it so seriously, and they do, where they begin to undermine you, your work in the church, your committee. They may begin to say things that are really unkind or untrue. And this is where we get that whole situation where people are like, well, I'm out of here. I don't like the color of those pew covers. And and because I gave money toward that, and you didn't pick the color I wanted, I'm out of here. And that happens more often than not. As I say it, it sounds so sort of silly and minimal, and what are you talking about? No, trust me. People will walk before they will admit that maybe somebody else has a good idea. And so the reason I bring this particular sermon up to you today is because you are going to in 2 weeks, step into a whole new reality with a new pastor. And he will come with a perspective of his own, and others will perhaps agree, and others may say, no. But it should be a time of reconciling and opening up and listening, and not simply saying, well, that's it. Check off that on the list, I'm out of here. That's what we don't want happening, and that's kind of why I thought this might be a good sermon to share again with you. We are going to talk about rule number 6. In this book, I just love how they put together your understanding of things. Here's the example that they use. 2 prime ministers are sitting in a room discussing affairs of state. Suddenly, a man bursts in, apoplectic with fury, shouting and stamping and banging his feet on the desk. The resident prime minister admonishes him. "Peter," he says, "kindly remember rule number 6. Whereupon Peter is instantly restored to complete calm, apologizes, and withdraws. The politicians return to their conversation, only to be interrupted yet again 20 minutes later by an hysterical woman gesticulating wildly and her hair flying all over. Again, the intruder is greeted with the words, "Marie, please remember rule number 6. Complete calm descends once more, and she too withdraws with a bow and an apology. When the scene is repeated for the 3rd time, the visiting prime minister addresses his colleague. "My dear friend, I've seen many things in my life, but never anything as remarkable as this. Would you be willing to share with me the secret of rule number 6? "Very simple," replied the resident prime minister. "Rule number 6 is don't take yourself so doggone seriously." "Ah," said the visitor, "that is a fine rule." And after a moment of pondering, he inquires, "And what, may I ask, are the other rules?" "There aren't any." Rule number 6 is not about working up into hilarious laughter at any given moment, but rather it reminds us to lighten up. Not in a way that is demeaning or it makes light of a serious situation, but in a way that helps us to distinguish between our worldly selves and our soul selves, the outside and the inside, our competitive self and our soul self. Rule number 6 helps us to differentiate those two sides of our personality. When we find ourselves pushing too hard for an issue or seeking too much control over a situation or an institution, and our anxieties and our fears escalate out of hand, remember rule number 6. You see, because as I've said, you can work yourselves into a frenzy over something like the color of the youth room, which color should it be painted. You can get into some really, awful mudslinging and name calling, and in the end, the room is painted something or other, sky blue pink, and it doesn't really matter. For the things that are just sort of physical and cursory, be willing to say, you know what? I've never seen sky blue pink on the wall, but let's try it. And if in a little while, if everybody decides that that is just not the color for us, well, then we'll get together and we'll determine a new color for the wall. We have to think in those kinds of terms, not just, well, this is the only way, and I'm an expert and you're just a peon, and all that, up and down the hierarchy of elitism and ignorance and all kinds of things that can take place. It's just so much easier and kinder to open up to other possibilities. What else might work here? It's when you change your focus to a mindset where you can respond in a positive manner that you will promote human development and transformation. I remember back in the mid-90s, they were beginning to discover, and this is really funny because it's so different now, that if churches advertised, in the newspapers, really with big advertisements and on billboards and things like that, wow, we might have more people coming into our churches if they knew we were here and they knew what we were about. Today, that seems so apparent that it's like, why is she even mentioning this? Because back when it all first came out and I was part of the Urban Cathedral project from the Presbyterian Church, I was appalled. What do you mean, advertise? We don't advertise, we're a church. I could hear myself sounding like some old curmudgeon. We don't advertise. Now we do. And it's like commonplace. And I had to really stop and say, wow, you don't sound very forward-thinking, and that's how you think of yourself, as forward-thinking, and here you are poo-pooing a notion that seems to be working in other places. So it's real easy to fall into that habit or into that mindset. And it was when I began to say, okay, we're going to advertise. Oh, we're going to advertise. But then when we did, and we had these very clever advertisements, and it appealed to different kinds of people in different ways, it all made so much sense, and it was so positive. But there for a while, I would have gone to the wall against that. It was just something we'd never done in the past. So you see, we all can learn from situations, and if we take the time to hear ourselves, then maybe we can apply rule number 6 if we're starting to sound a little too stuffy and a little too staid. Throughout Scripture, we are confronted with stories and personalities that are transformed because the people step out of themselves. They set their fears and their anxieties aside, and they entrust themselves to God's care. And when they do, transformation occurs and miracles happen. In the Genesis story we heard this morning, God makes a promise to Sarah. And Sarah laughs. Seems kind of strange that she should laugh. But she is so startled and so elated and overjoyed that all she can think to do is just smile and laugh out loud. How can she have a baby? She couldn't believe it. She's too old. But it was going to happen, and it was going to happen to her. We know that Abraham and Sarah followed God's call to leave their homeland, and they stepped out into the unknown, and they did that without hesitation. Many of us have done it. Many of us have done it without hesitation, and others of us have done it being dragged and pulled and crying our eyes out the whole way. Now, God has told her she will have a baby. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited some more. And when it was biologically impossible for her to have a child, God steps in. You know, we have to remember that God makes promises, and only makes promises that God will keep. And so Sarah, realizing that the promise is going to be fulfilled, laughs. And she lets go very quickly of any negative attitudes or fears and beliefs that could possibly block this miracle. She laughs with joy at God's possibility. She lets go of concerns about her biological reality and the impossibility of being pregnant. She turns it to a response that says, God is with us. God is keeping God's promises to us and to all the future generations. I am here for you, says God. And as a congregation, you need to feel assured that God is with you. God made a promise to this congregation 90 years ago. And for 90 years, this congregation, in form and in fashion that has been varying in size and dimension, God has stayed with each one of us and with the witness of this church. And so instead of just passing over that or just pushing it aside, we need to feel really good about that. There should be a smile on every face as we say, yes, we are here and we are going to move forward, and God only knows what we will look like in the future. But we can rest assured that it will be wonderful, it will be powerful, it will be God-filled. You see, because we won't care about things like the color of the walls or stuff like that, okay? We're going to be able to compromise. We're going to move forward and say, this is the best thing that's happened to us yet. Because if we employ rule number 6, we can let go of our need, our desire to control our circumstances, to overstate our case to the point of alarm, and we can let go of our need to create chaos and confusion, because that's usually a byproduct of that kind of infighting. It just starts to get real cloudy and confusing, and you start saying, why am I here? Why did I bother? We don't want to be saying that. We want to be saying, yes, this is the right thing for now. Yes, we can do this. And yes, God will lead us in this continuing witness. the one thing we have to do is to remember rule number 6 and not to take ourselves too seriously. You see, we don't have to take ourselves seriously because God takes us seriously. That's who we have to answer to. The creator, redeemer, and sustainer of the universe is there for us. He's here for us to point out the way, to help us enter into a new chapter in our lives. This change in attitude and perspective signals to others where our allegiance lies. And the Presbyterian Church has been forced to take stands in recent years that haven't been terribly popular, but we have stayed the course. And we are allowing change in our lives because God is a God of change. God doesn't want us to slam our fists on the desk and slam the door shut and get in our cars and zoom out of here at breakneck speed. No, God's saying, stay, be part of the change, be part of the miracle of the 21st century. And just as I was, so bent out of shape about advertising in a very secular fashion, I mean, really, when I think about what I was thinking in my head, wow, boy, you got stodgy awfully quickly. And so I had to learn how to change that up and embrace the change. And I met people and I saw churches working in different ways, and it was wonderful. And I could have walked away from it all, but I didn't. I didn't know about rule number 6. But I did know that I wanted to be part of the church that was moving toward the future. And that's what you all want to be. Part of a church that's moving toward the future. The bottom line is this, my friends. God is in charge. If you think otherwise, you will be surprised. So let God's will and God's Spirit flow through you so that all who come may see that you are God's and God is here with you. Amen. And thank you for 2.5 wonderful, challenging years.